Daniel Ricciardo endured yet another challenging weekend in Melbourne, and it seems like problems won't end anytime soon for the Aussie driver. After the latest developments and events related to Tsunoda's performance, it seems like Ricciardo will be treated the same way as the man he replaced, Nyck de Vries. So, are we currently seeing the last days of the Honey Badger? And more importantly, what is the ultimatum that's been given to him by Helmut Marko? It's safe to say that Helmut Marko and his negative comments made towards Ricciardo have been further solidified by the Aussie's poor performance in front of his home crowd, and the fact that Tsunoda finished 7th didn't help his situation at all. As of now, the Japanese driver holds all 6 points that Racing Bulls have in the season, single-handedly being ahead of teams like Haas, Alpine and Kick Sauber. This is why Helmut Marko made sure to remind Ricciardo that although it's obvious that his marketing value as well as his experience in the sport are greatly valued at the team, there won't be any mercy in the following period if he continues to get outperformed by his teammate. According to a report made by the Herald, Marko has already given Ricciardo an ultimatum: either improve your form in the next 2 races in Japan and China, or face the fate that Nyck de Vries faced. And considering the fact that Racing Bulls, more precisely AlphaTauri, has already done this in the past, it's not that hard to imagine that it could be applied to Ricciardo as well. Be that as it may, it's definitely a massive challenge for Ricciardo, because he did express his concerns about the performance of the car, and it's not the first time that he's been outperformed by a teammate in his career. That's been the main reason why he got sacked from McLaren. But why would Racing Bulls put this ultimatum on Ricciardo's head? Well, I think the answer is pretty well known. Liam Lawson. The Kiwi driver turned out to be quite a competitive driver himself in the 5-race stint he had with AlphaTauri last year, and at one point he was the highest ranking driver for the team in Singapore before Ricciardo's finish in Mexico. And when talking about the potential seat at Racing Bulls, which is now one of the realistic scenarios for Lawson's career, the Kiwi driver went on to say, "I think Daniel knows that the potential is there, but I'm sure he's probably expected to step up. Obviously, this year is the first in a while where everything is exactly the same. It makes it very tough to get a seat when there are multiple guys. I feel like I'm ready, but there are a lot of other guys there too. I can definitely do a better job than Ricciardo now, and ultimately, my goal is to get back in that seat as soon as possible." However, Lawson understands that the world of F1 is an unforgiving place, and if the opportunity in the Racing Bulls never arises, he wouldn't be shy about seeking a seat somewhere else. As he continued, "Red Bull's environment is pretty cutthroat. I would love to drive for them, but ultimately I want to be in F1 regardless of the team." This does send a fierce warning to Red Bull, because it's evident that Lawson won't think twice if an opportunity with another team presents itself, and that's exactly what Marko is afraid of. Even though there is no need to replace Perez right now, the veteran Austrian acknowledged that both he and Ricciardo are well past their prime, and age will play a massive role when it comes to who will be next to Verstappen in the following period. This translates to bad news for Ricciardo, because even though his ultimate goal is to retire with the Austrian team, as of now, he's getting outperformed by Tsunoda, who's hoping to be considered for the Red Bull seat if there is any opportunity to replace Perez at all. Talking about the second seat alongside Verstappen, Marko went on to say, "Ricciardo and Tsunoda may be hoping for a place in the first team in Red Bull, but for that to happen, one of them will have to be well ahead of the other. Ricciardo is a little behind. But let's say it like this: Tsunoda has speed in qualifying, but in the race, they're both too slow. Of course, we do have to think about the future. Both Ricciardo and Perez are over 30, and that depends on the two of them, what their ideas are, how long they want to drive, and we have to be prepared for that." Now, Melbourne has shown that this is not the case, and Marko has changed his opinion quite quickly about the Japanese driver when it comes to whether or not he has what it takes to be Verstappen's teammate. However, it's worth mentioning that before Red Bull makes this scenery, they will very likely want to see if Tsunoda can outperform Lawson in the same seat, and if Ricciardo's performance continues to be the same in the following 2 races, then we're very likely going to see a duel between these 2 young bucks in the remainder of the 2024 season. Liam Lawson did say that it didn't feel good to be not in the seat after knowing that he outperformed Tsunoda in the 5-race span that they raced together, adding that it should be me who drives that car from 2024 onwards. Now, the opportunity could be very well presented to him much earlier than anticipated, as the initial promise from Horner was for Lawson to receive a seat from 2025 onwards. Another side that could mess up the entire situation for Ricciardo is Carlos Sainz. because he's now considered one of the primary candidates to replace Perez if the opportunity ever arises. Again, Red Bull is considering replacing Sergio as of now due to his strong performance in the first 2 races, but Melbourne has raised some questions about whether or not he could be up to the challenge in case Verstappen is out of the race. Yes, he did have floor damage, but finishing 40 seconds behind the leading pair and at P5 is not something that Verstappen would have done anyways. And now with the grid being even more competitive than in the past 2 seasons, Red Bull would definitely bet on a driver who needs to deliver week in and week out, and that's what Sainz will provide to them. If you think about it, it's the perfect scenario for the Spaniard as well. He'll get to drive the most superior car in 2025, unlike the other offers he's got from Mercedes and Sauber, and the Audi project will take 3 years before they get competitive, meaning that for 4 consecutive seasons, Sainz will be at the back of the grid or fighting in the midfield. From what we can see right now, Mercedes has a very strong chance to fall in the midfield after the upgrades from McLaren and Ferrari proved to be too much to handle. So when talking about this matter, Horner acknowledged that Sainz's performance in Melbourne is not something that should be turned a blind eye to, further adding, "Based on Sainz's performance in Melbourne, you couldn't rule any possibility out. We just want to take our time. Checo's race was compromised on Sunday, but he's had a great start to the season. We're not in any desperate rush. Carlos is the only driver who has beaten Red Bull since the 2022 British GP, so he appears to be our only nemesis. I think it's still very early in the year to be thinking about Ricciardo's replacement for Perez. Yuki is a very quick driver, we know that, but we want to field the best pairing we can have at Red Bull. Sometimes you've got to look outside the pool as well. We've had a very fast unemployed driver win. The market is reasonably fluid with certain drivers." Well, there is no doubt that Ricciardo's role in racing bulls is very certain. You bring a lot of experience, help the team get as many points as possible, bring the team into the midfield, and be considered one of the primary candidates to replace Perez. But with Hamilton's bombshell move to Ferrari, a lot of pieces have moved, and all of a sudden, a potential 2015 reunion between Sainz and Verstappen has turned out to be the most likely scenario for the Austrian squad, especially if you think about Horner's statement that no driver is above the team, and he might want to prove that even further by bringing another competitive driver alongside Verstappen for the greater interest of the team. This would effectively shut Ricciardo's chances to go to Red Bull, and judging by the role of racing bulls as well as the talented youth they have in Liam Lawson, it's evident that there is a massive chance that the team must think about, and even more importantly, it could open up a path for Lawson to join Red Bull at a certain point further down the road. So with this in mind, what do you think about Ricciardo's ultimatum from Helmut Marko? And more importantly, do you think the team is ready to move on without the Aussie driver? Let us know in the comments down below.